In Turkey, the government of Turkey has been extraordinarily generous, making payments, free health care. Jordan, our friends in Jordan, are completely overrun. In Lebanon, there are more Syrian refugee children in Lebanese primary school than Lebanese children. To think that will not affect us is naive. To think that there's no solutions, well, that's just wrong. To think it's easy is just crazy. So here's the deal. I'm going to work with Senator Lay and the members of this committee to put together an emergency relief package. And if you don't think this is an emergency, I welcome the contest. I welcome the debate. This account is 1% of the federal budget, and because of world events, it is tremendously under siege. And I don't want to take money away from PEPFAR. I don't want to take money away from malaria. I don't want to take money away from the Peace Corps. I'm not going to take money away from embassy security. So what do? I think we have to recognize we have an emergency on our hand, then we have to come up with a long-term strategy, and it has to be world-driven, not United States-driven. In the op-ed piece I referenced, Bono suggested that now's the time to think big. I could not agree more. We know in the past that radicalized populations were turned around. Germany and Japan were very radicalized populations. The Marshall Plan did work. Out of that effort, we have now 2 stable democracies that are allies. The difference is the war is still going on and we don't have an occupation force. Radical Islam is spreading its wings all over the Mideast and throughout Africa. And the question for this committee, the country, and the world is how do you destroy radical Islamic extremists and other radical ideologies? General Jones will tell us about the limitations of military power. Mr. Blinken will tell us about the limitations of diplomacy. Mr. Bono will tell us about the possibilities of the private sector joining with the government to give people hope that have none now. I'm a pretty hawkish fellow, but I've learned a long time ago, about 30 trips ago, that you're not going to win this war by killing terrorists. The biggest threat to radical ideology is a small schoolhouse educating a poor young girl. That will do more damage to the radical Islamic extremists than any bomb you could drop on their head.
Today's threats are exponentially more diverse and more complex than those we faced in the bipolar world we left behind in the 20th century. They include the likes of cancerous terrorist and criminal enterprise, failing states and conflict triggering massive refugee flows, grave natural resource threats, and the ongoing battle for hearts and minds between the forces of modernity and those of hate and intolerance. These challenges are synergistic and extreme, yet so are the opportunities created by many positive trends in the march of human advancement. But if our future is to be defined by our opportunities rather than the threats, it demands, and I stress demands, far deeper conception and understanding of national and international security, one less reliant on reaction and far more focused on anticipation and even prevention, one that centers on disarming the root causes and major multipliers of conflict and instability, and one that in the long run is much less costly than what we practice today. Viewed through that lens, what comes into sharp focus, in my view, is that the premier strategic threat to global security and to our own is not any single country or any single ideology or any single weapon. It is human need, the unsatisfied demands for life basics, including food, energy, water, dignity, and a better future for masses living on the edge. And as I understand it, the purpose of this hearing is to examine the causes and consequences of violent extremism. For many extremist leaders and their acolytes, the attraction to violent Islam is born of religious fanaticism and the selfish lust for power. Others find their attraction in depraved quest for belonging. For multitudes, the simple motivation is sustenance, fear, and coercion. But what is abundantly clear, however, is that extremists bank on leveraging human want and desperation for their own purposes. They seek to exploit human misery in the pursuit of scale, at scale, and with increasing access to sophisticated weaponry. Violent extremism is as great a threat to global stability and prosperity, including our own, as any state power.
Ultimately, at the heart of our strategy is a commitment to the principles that have underwritten an unprecedented era of greater peace and prosperity over the last 7 decades since World War II. Good governance and pluralism, the rule of law and fundamental freedoms, human rights and human dignity. That commitment extends to those who flee violence around the world. When it comes to refugee resettlement and the refugee crisis more generally, our first priority is to safeguard the American people. But at the same time, we must and we will continue to provide refuge to the vulnerable, which has been a bedrock of our country for centuries. Over the last several months, we've heard divisive and hateful rhetoric in all corners of the world, including the United States, that's conflated refugees with violent extremists and demonized those fleeing persecution, violence, and terrorism. Our ultimate success in the fight against violent extremism will be determined by our ability to hold fast to the very values the terrorists oppose, our capacity for reason, for wisdom, and for compassion.
I've just returned from Africa and the Middle East, where I was lucky to join a Codel led by Senator Graham there. I visited Kenya, Jordan, and then with the team, Turkey and Egypt. This visit revealed one fact and two fictions. The fact is that aid can no longer be seen as charity, a nice thing to do when we can afford it. If there's one thing I would like you to take away from this testimony, it is that aid in 2016 is not charity, it is national security. And when it's structured properly with a hard focus on fighting corruption and improving governance to qualify for that aid, it could be the best bulwark we have against the violent extremism that is gaining traction in the Levant and the Sahel. The two fictions the expedition revealed to me were, number one, that this refugee problem is temporary. The typical crisis that creates refugees lasts 25 years. On our trip, Senator Graham and I heard the term permanent temporary solution thrown around, but without the irony that phrase requires. The second fiction is that it's simply a Middle Eastern problem. Refugees are flowing from all over the world, especially Africa, actually. Of the top 10 countries that are hosting refugees today, 5 of them are African. In Europe, the problem has moved from practical to existential. In 1989, the wall that divided Europe came down, a remarkable moment to live through. Who could imagine in 2016 another set of walls being built up, this time made of mesh and razor wire, but walls nevertheless? Members of the subcommittee, let me soberly suggest to you that the integration of Europe, the very idea of European unity, is at risk here. Europe is America's most important ally since the Second World War. Are we not your most important ally in the fight against violent extremism? This should really matter to you. I know it does. Put simply, as we Europeans have learned, if the Middle East catches fire, the flames jump any border controls. And if Africa fails, Europe cannot succeed. It's not rocket science, it's math.